The fluorescent lights hum their electric prayer above Seattle General's third floor, a sound like insects trapped in glass, and somewhere beneath that mechanical whine is the soft percussion of Danielle Ross's rubber-soled shoes on linoleum tiles. She moves through the corridor with her shoulders slightly rounded, her frame hunched into itself as if apologizing for the 6 feet of muscle and scar tissue she occupies. The scrubs she wears are printed with cartoon animals, cheerful giraffes and smiling elephants, a costume so deliberately soft, so aggressively non-threatening, that the nursing staff barely registers her presence as she passes. Room 347. Colonel Vance, 73 years old, admitted 6 days ago with a thoracic aortic aneurysm that the surgeons deemed too risky to touch. The kind of patient everyone knows is waiting. His daughter had stepped out 20 minutes ago for coffee, and his grandchild was with her. Just the colonel and the machines now, and Danielle checking his oxygen saturation with the efficiency of someone who has done this 1,000 times in 1,000 places that didn't have the luxury of monitors or alarms. She doesn't flinch when she sees his eyes open. Colonel Vance watches her with the particular intensity of someone who has spent a lifetime measuring the worth of people in milliseconds, and his gaze carries the weight of recognition she cannot afford to acknowledge. She adjusts his full line with practiced fingers, movements that look casual to the untrained eye but are actually the result of field medicine executed at 12,000 feet in the Hindu Kush, where time moved differently and mistakes meant flag-folded briefings at Arlington. "How's the pain?" she asks, her voice soft as the scrub she wears. A voice designed to disappear into hospital walls. "Manageable, nurse." He doesn't ask her name. She won't volunteer it. This is the arrangement they've maintained for 6 days, a silent understanding that passes between them in the space of a glance. His right hand rests on his chest, and she notices the tremor there, not fear, not pain, but something else. Something like acknowledgement. The monitor beside his bed shows vitals that make her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Blood pressure 94/58 and drifting. Heart rate climbing toward 118. The aneurysm isn't just waiting anymore. It's waking up. She's seen this progression before, in different beds, under different flags, and her hands know exactly what comes next. She adjusts nothing on the machines. Not yet. She simply watches him watching her, and in that moment, the hospital around them seems to compress into the small square of the room, the white walls, the beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic layered over something older and more honest, the smell of human bodies failing. "I'm going to get you more comfortable," she says. Still soft. Still apologetic. The crash alarm sounds at 2:17 p.m. from room 319, and Danielle is moving before the second beep, her body responding to a sound that triggers muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Room 319 belongs to Marcus Chen, a 52-year-old accountant with a post-operative pneumothorax, and by the time she reaches the doorway the monitors are screaming in that particular way that means the lung has collapsed completely and the heart is starting to understand that no oxygen is coming. Dr. Pierce hasn't arrived yet. The resident, a young man named Kowalski who still gets nervous in emergencies, is staring at the monitors as if they might change their story. The patient's face is gray. His oxygen saturation is 71 and dropping. His blood pressure is 82/46, which means his heart is trying to pump nothing into nothing, and in approximately 90 seconds he will be clinically dead. Danielle is already moving. She's already gloved, and her hands are already reaching for the crash cart, and the set of her jaw, barely perceptible, the kind of tightness that might be mistaken for concentration instead of the absolute clarity that comes from having watched people die in ways that would make what's happening in room 319 look gentle. "Prepare for needle decompression," she says to Kowalski, and her voice has dropped half an octave. Not a question. Not a request. 14-gauge angiocath. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Dr. Pierce isn't here yet, the protocol. She's already positioning the patient. She's already located the space where the pneumothorax is compressing the heart, where the needle needs to go, and her hands are moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who has done this in darkness while IEDs echoed in mountain valleys. The needle slides in with the distinctive hiss of pressurized air escaping, the sound of a lung re-inflating, the sound of a patient coming back from the edge. The oxygen saturation climbs. 75, 82. 88, the blood pressure rises. The monitor's screaming becomes rhythm instead of panic. Danielle steps back. She strips her gloves with a single smooth motion. She doesn't breathe heavily. She doesn't acknowledge what just happened. She simply returns to the doorway and walks back toward room 347, leaving Kowalski standing there with his mouth partially open, understanding at some level that what he witnessed wasn't textbook protocol but wasn't quite wrong either. Dr. Pierce arrives 4 minutes later. He enters room 319 with the confidence of a man who has never faced consequences, his white coat perfectly pressed, his expression arranged into the particular blend of concern and competence that has carried him through 30 years of practice and 3 malpractice settlements. He surveys the stabilized patient with eyes that register the successful outcome but somehow fail to register who achieved it. Who performed the decompression? He asks Kowalski. Nurse Ross. She stabilized. Pierce's voice carries the tone of someone checking off boxes on a form. Yes, sir. Completely stabilized. He nods once and makes notes in the patient's chart, his pen moving with the authority of someone whose documentation will be the official narrative, the truth that hospitals believe because it's written in the right hand with the right credentials behind it. Danielle, standing in the hallway with her cartoon animals and her soft voice, has already become invisible again. But Colonel Vance saw what she did. Not the needle decompression that happened in room 319. What he saw was the way she moved through the hospital like water finding the lowest point, like someone who has learned to navigate impossible spaces. He saw the hands steady as surgical lasers, the eyes that carried the particular flatness of altitude and old war, the automatic competence that doesn't announce itself. It's 3:42 p.m. when his daughter returns with coffee and a granddaughter who is 7 years old and immune to hospitals because she's never learned to fear them yet. They're talking about the playground, about whether the swings are still broken, about small things. And then the little girl points at Danielle as she passes room 347, checking the 4 line with her efficient fingers, adjusting the saline drip with her practiced movements. Mommy, what's her name? The granddaughter asks. She's nice. Danielle doesn't stop. She doesn't slow. But her hand pauses for just a fraction of a second before she completes her adjustment to the 4. A moment so brief that only someone who knows how to read signs in soldiers' hands and faces would catch it. Colonel Vance's daughter is already asking, but Danielle has already moved on, her name and her rank and her history all still hidden beneath cartoon animals and a voice designed to disappear. I didn't catch her name tag, sweetheart. Just one of our nurses. The documentation happens at 4:15 p.m. Danielle sits at the nursing station with her own chart to update, her own records to complete, and her handwriting on the page looks almost military in its precision, the letters formed with the kind of careful control that comes from years of documenting things in darkness, on surfaces that couldn't quite be seen. She writes the procedure notes with technical language that belongs in surgical suites, not nursing reports. The placement is perfect. The timing is precise. The outcome is documented with numbers instead of emotion. Dr. Pierce walks past and doesn't read what she's written. He stops at the desk, sets down a file, and without making eye contact says, the nursing staff here needs to remember the importance of hierarchy and chain of command. He's not talking to her directly. He's speaking to the space around her, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the other nurses hear it. His eyes are focused on something just past her left shoulder. And Danielle continues writing her perfectly formed letters, her perfectly precise numbers, her perfectly documented intervention that doesn't deviate from protocol because everything she did was exactly what should have been done, just done before authorization could be requested. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't respond. She doesn't even look up from her documentation. The tremor in her hands, if anyone had been close enough to see it, which they weren't, isn't fear. It's restraint. It's the kind of control that comes from having already survived worse than a surgeon's contempt. What Dr. Pierce doesn't know is that Colonel Vance has been watching this nurse with the professional attention of someone who spent 42 years in command, who has seen real leadership and known its absence, who knows exactly what he witnessed in room 319. And somewhere in the machinery of hospitals and records and official histories, a single memory is being logged, the name of the woman who saved his patient's life while he was still walking down the hallway. The machines of Seattle General continue their mechanical prayer. The fluorescent lights hum their trapped insect song. And Danielle Ross finishes her documentation with careful precision, her folded flag still hidden at the bottom of her locker, still waiting for the moment when cartoon animals and apologetic posture might finally be allowed to fall away. The morning light cuts through the corridor windows at a sharp angle, harsh and unforgiving, and Dr. Pierce corners her outside room 347 before she can move past. His voice projects loud enough for everyone inside to hear, a Colonel Vance in the bed, his daughter gripping the chair arm. Nurse Ross, your unconventional approach yesterday. Bypassing established protocol. That raises serious questions about your judgment. He doesn't step back. Doesn't give her space. His tone carries the particular cruelty of a man who has never been contradicted. Perhaps formal education wasn't emphasized in whatever program you completed. Danielle's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. One muscle. That's all. She meets his eyes with the flat 1,000-yard stare she perfected in the Hindu Kush, the look that comes from having watched friends die under incorrect orders from officers with education but no instinct. She says nothing. Let him fill the silence. That's what they always do. The patient stabilized, Dr. Pierce. Her voice stays level. Mechanical. The voice of someone reading lab results, not defending herself. By luck, not competence. I've documented this incident. He turns toward room 347, theatrical in his concern, loud enough for the family to absorb every word like poison. Please excuse our combat nurse here. She sometimes forgets this is a hospital, not a battlefield. He says combat nurse like an insult. Like she's a problem that wandered in wearing scrubs. Her hands remain perfectly steady on her tablet. No tremor. No flush creeping up her neck. Just hands that have held lives together, continuing to exist, continuing to function, while a man half her military worth lectures her about protocol. The badge hanging from her pocket, cartoon animals, deliberately childish, catches the fluorescent light as if mocking the competence underneath. By lunch, the break room empties when she sits down. She doesn't watch it happen. Doesn't acknowledge the sudden urgency of tasks remembered elsewhere. Nurse Chen was heading to the med cart anyway. Rodriguez just remembered she needed to check on a post-op. Within 90 seconds, the room breathes nothing but her presence and the low hum of the vending machine. Pierce has spent weeks planting seeds, and they've taken root like weeds in spring soil. Concerning lack of formal protocol. Questionable judgment calls. Difficult to work with. One nurse whispers to another by the coffee station, just loud enough for transmission. Pierce says she nearly killed someone in the ICU last month. Danielle eats her sandwich, turkey, no mayo, military efficiency, face betraying nothing. The muscles around her eyes don't twitch. Her breathing doesn't change. She has been isolated before. She has been betrayed before. She has sat in Phi base bunkers while command made decisions that cost lives, and she survived that too. A break room is nothing. An institutional betrayal is nothing compared to the weight of watching someone die because a superior officer was too proud to listen. At 3 o'clock, the unit board displays her official write-up, printed in the clinical language of institutional warfare, documented insubordination. Nurse Ross bypassed direct physician orders during code situation, endangering patient welfare per hospital regulation 4.7.1. The regulation number is fabricated. She checked. But the write-up sits there anyway, laminated and permanent, a public declaration of her unreliability. Staff read it as they pass, eyes sliding away from her like water off sealed armor. One nurse actually looks at her, really looks, and Danielle sees the conflict in her expression, the war between what she knows to be true and what a prestigious surgeon has convinced her to believe. She continues her rounds with mechanical precision. Room 302. Room 303. Room 304. The only tell is the slight pause before entering each room, the infinitesimal breath where she compartmentalizes what just happened and prepares to smile at a patient, to steady a trembling hand that isn't hers, to be the person they need her to be. The folded flag rests in her locker still, hidden beneath her civilian clothes, beneath the carefully constructed mask of a woman without a past. Colonel Vance commanded her son's last deployment. The connection alone, if anyone examined it, could compromise the entire mission. Her position here isn't about career advancement or the satisfaction of saving lives, though that matters, it always matters. This position is an active operation to monitor the VA transfer pipeline for security leaks, to identify which officers are selling classified information, which hospital staff have been turned by foreign intelligence. She cannot afford Pierce's scrutiny. She cannot afford him digging into her background, pulling her credentials, discovering the gaps that would tell any competent investigator she isn't who her official file claims. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at 2 o'clock on Thursday, when the waiting room doors exploded inward like they'd been hit by a IED. A man 6'5", tactical vest bulging, AR-15 raised at port arms. "Where's Pierce? Where is he?" His voice cracks on the second name like the voice of someone still processing rage through a PTSD filter that has been collecting rust for 3 weeks. Families scatter like startled birds, children screaming, a mother pushing a stroller backward so hard it hits the wall. Behind the reception desk, 3 staff members drop to the floor, hands over their heads as if desk height would stop a 5.56 round traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Nurses sprint for the stairwells. 1. Patterson, new grad, 3 months in, freezes for a full second, her brain failing to process the command her body needs to execute, and Danielle's instinct fires before her conscious mind engages. "Move! Now!" But Patterson bolts for the back exit, finally connecting. In his glass office, Dr. Pierce freezes mid-sentence on a phone call, face draining white as he locks eyes with the gunman through the transparent wall that was supposed to signify his authority and suddenly just looks like a coffin waiting for him. Danielle stands at the nurse's station, folders in her hands, patient discharge summaries she'd just been reviewing, and she sets them down slowly. Deliberately. The gesture reads as calm to anyone who knows how to read composure, which is almost no one. Security is 2 minutes out. She heard the code. The gunman's hands shake on the rifle, sweat pouring down his face despite the air conditioning maintaining its precise 68 degrees. His eyes dart everywhere and nowhere, the hypervigilance of someone still in the war, and Danielle recognizes the tremor pattern immediately. Not tactical training. PTSD. The kind that rewires a nervous system to treat fluorescent lights and automatic doors as IEDs waiting to detonate. She sets her tablet down beside the folders. Around her, the ER transforms into a landscape of abandoned shoes and forgotten phones. A child's stuffed bear lies on one of the waiting room chairs, waiting for hands that are currently pressed against a parent's chest, the bear's plastic face turned toward the door where chaos entered. While others run, Danielle Ross walks directly toward him. Her hands visible. Empty. At her sides. "I can hear you," she says. Her voice drops an octave, calibrated to the frequency that penetrates panic and reaches the part of the brain still capable of language. The same cadence she used in Kandahar. "Tell me your name." His rifle swings toward her, the barrel wavering like a compass needle that can't find true north. "My wife, she died here 3 weeks ago." And that bastard, he chokes on rage so thick it sounds like drowning. He said she waited too long. Blamed her for waiting too long. She was pregnant. She was bleeding, and he told her to go home, and she died in the parking lot, and his voice cracks again. Pierce's office door clicks locked from inside. The sound carries across the waiting room like an insult. Danielle takes another step forward, closing the distance to 15 feet. "I believe you," she says, and the words carry the weight of someone who has sat with grief, who has held it, who understands that rage is just grief with nowhere to go. "What was her name?" "I believe you," she says, and the words carry the weight of someone who has sat with grief, who has held it, who understands that rage is just grief with nowhere to go. "What was her name?" The man's hands tremor. Not fear. Restraint. The AR-15 wavers like a metronome between targets, the waiting room family still frozen in their scatter, the charge nurse crouched behind the reception desk, the security guard who hasn't yet reached for his radio because he is smart enough to understand that sound is a trigger. Sarah, he says. Sarah Michelle Webb. She was 34. She liked gardens. She liked his voice cracks like concrete under pressure. She liked coffee with cinnamon. Real cinnamon, not the fake stuff. Danielle nods once. The gesture is surgical. Precise. Behind her, the waiting room holds its breath like a single organism preparing for violence. 3 weeks ago, she says quietly. Tell me what happened. The man's jaw clenches. His name is Marcus Webb. She read it in the police reports that crossed her desk at 0400 this morning, flagged by her handler as a potential security concern, a veteran with a discharge date and a wife's death certificate. Honorably discharged from the 10th Mountain Division. 2 tours in Kandahar. Combat medic. The kind of man trained to save lives, trained to fail at it, trained to carry that weight like shrapnel embedded in bone. She had a stroke, Marcus says. At home. I called 911. They brought her here. She was conscious. Scared. I held her hand in the ambulance and I told her, he swallows hard. The barrel of the rifle tilts downward another degree. I told her the doctors would fix it. I told her she was going to be okay. Danielle takes 1 step forward. The waiting room goes rigid. A child somewhere begins to cry, but the sound is muffled, a parent's hand covering a small mouth. The fluorescent lights buzz their metallic hum above them, indifferent to the loaded weapon now pointing at a wall instead of a person. Dr. Pierce treated her. Danielle asks. He was busy, Marcus says, and the bitterness in those 3 words could curdle diesel fuel. They put her in a bay. They ran tests. I waited. And waited. And then a nurse came out and said they were moving her to ICU, and I thought that meant, his voice splinters. I thought that meant she was getting better. Danielle is 6 feet away now. She can smell him, sweat and gun oil and the particular reek of someone who hasn't slept in 48 hours, who has been sitting in his truck outside this hospital calculating the exact geometry of vengeance. The tremor in his hands accelerates. His breathing has become shallow, rapid. A man riding the edge between collapse and explosion. She wasn't getting better, Marcus continues. The words tumble now, a dam breaking. She was dying. And Pierce, he documented that we waited too long. That I delayed treatment. That it was family error, not medical error. I found the records. I read every single word. Family presentation delayed seeking evaluation. That's what he wrote. As if Sarah didn't jump in the truck the second her speech started slurring. As if I didn't drive 87 miles per hour on I-35 to get here. As if his voice becomes something inhuman. A sound like an animal caught in a snare. As if I killed her. The security guard has moved now, slow, careful, radio in hand. But Danielle doesn't look at him. Her eyes never leave Marcus Webb's dilated pupils, the white around the iris that comes with adrenaline poisoning, the particular glassiness of a man who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times, and now that it is here, the reality does not match the fantasy. You didn't kill her, Danielle says. Her voice has dropped an octave. The cadence shifts, something ancient and practiced emerges, the tone she used in the Hindu Kush when a boy of 17 with a stolen PKM rifle was sobbing in an alley outside Kandahar, convinced he had murdered his own family in the crossfire. The stroke killed her. The delay didn't. A stroke happens in minutes. You brought her here in minutes. You did everything right. Marcus shakes his head violently. The rifle barrel swings, not at her, but close enough that the air displacement feels like a presence. He blamed me. That's what I can't, he put it in writing. He made it official. And he walks around this hospital like nothing happened. Like her death was a file he could close. Then let me tell you what he did, Danielle says. She takes another step. 4 feet now between her and the muzzle of the AR-15. The distance feels like the width of Kandahar in summer heat, dusty and infinite, and somehow the only space that matters. He documented the timeline. He created a liability shield. He made sure when the lawyers came, the hospital would be protected. And he never once looked at your wife. Not really. He didn't know her name. He still doesn't. He'll never know she liked cinnamon in her coffee. The rifle lowers another 2 inches. You know her name, Marcus whispers. How did you? Because that's what matters, Danielle says. Not the records. Not the timeline. Sarah. That's what matters. That's what he missed. That's what he'll never have. Behind her, Pierce's silhouette appears in the window of his glass office. She can feel his eyes like a laser sight on her spine. But her hands remain visible, palms open, fingers spread in the universal gesture of surrender that is not surrender at all. It is the language of someone who understands that violence is just a conversation that hasn't found its words yet. I trained soldiers, Danielle continues, her voice steady as a surgical laser. Men who had seen things that broke them. Men who came home and couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't look at their families without seeing what they'd done, what they'd failed to do. One of them, lieutenant out of Kandahar, name was Holloway. He couldn't accept that some things weren't his fault. Couldn't accept that sometimes people die and it's not a failure. She pauses. The waiting room is so quiet now that the ventilation system becomes audible, a whisper, a breath. He found a way to blame himself anyway. And it killed him. Not a bullet. Just the weight of it. Marcus is crying now. The rifle trembles with the effort of holding it up. His shoulders fold inward as if the air pressure itself has become too dense to bear. Sarah wouldn't want this, Danielle says. She moves closer. 3 feet now. The rifle is angled downward, the muzzle pointing at the linoleum tile floor. She wouldn't want you here. She wouldn't want. I don't know how to live without her, Marcus says, and the sentence is so quiet that Danielle has to lean in to hear it. I don't know how to do that. Then you don't, Danielle says. The words are clipped, clinical. Delivered like medication. You don't have to live without her. You have to learn to live with her absence. There's a difference. The rifle drops. It hits the linoleum with a sound like a bell, a hollow metallic clang that seems to echo through the entire hospital. Marcus Webb collapses to his knees, the weapon clattering away toward the reception desk. He folds in on himself like paper in water, his body racked with sobs that sound like the last transmission of a dying man. The security guards move then, fast, professional, weapons holstered. They have seen enough. They know the threat has ended not with a shot fired but with something far more complicated, a man who came here to kill the one thing he couldn't kill and discovering instead that the one thing he needed to kill was already dead, had been dead all along, sealed in paperwork and protocol and the kind of institutional indifference that turns names into file numbers. Danielle steps back as they secure him. She doesn't watch the cuffs go on. She doesn't watch him being led toward the exit. She doesn't turn around to see Pierce emerging from his office, his face already calculating the angles, the documentation he will need, the narrative he will construct around this moment. Instead, she walks back to the charge nurse station. Her hands are steady. Her breathing hasn't elevated above baseline. She sits down at the computer and begins charting her observations, vital signs, behavioral assessment, de-escalation technique employed, outcome. The words flow like they always do. Precise. Clinical. Free of interpretation or emotion. Around her, the waiting room comes back to life. Families emerge from beneath chairs. Staff whisper to each other. Someone's phone rings. The sounds of a hospital returning to itself, pretending that nothing just happened, that a man did not walk through the doors with the intention of murder, that a nurse did not walk toward him while everyone else ran. By noon, the incident report appears. By early afternoon, the first of the whispered comments reached the break room. Too aggressive, should have let security handle it, psychological instability evident in her desire to engage with an armed individual. By shift change, at 18:47 hours, an official envelope sits on the charge nurse's desk. Her name on it. Her employee ID. An emergency suspension pending investigation per Hospital Regulation 7.3.2, Section A, unauthorized crisis intervention, reckless endangerment, psychological unsuitability for high-acuity nursing. 17 signatures from staff. 17 names of people Pierce has spent months positioning against her, each one believing they are testifying to her instability when in fact they are testifying only to how effectively Pierce has orchestrated their doubt. She reads the letter in the locker room at 19:04 hours. Her badge is deactivated at 19:06 hours. She removes the folded flag of a fallen teammate from the locker shelf, the one thing she has never let anyone see, and tucks it into her jacket pocket. Then she walks out of Seattle General the same way Marcus Webb will, through the ambulance bay exit, through the evening rain, into the kind of darkness that feels like it might never end. Her phone buzzes at 19:24 hours. Her handler. 3 words in encrypted text, mission parameters compromised. She doesn't respond. She knows what it means. She knows what comes next. She knows that somewhere in the Pentagon, in offices she never wants to see again, people are reviewing her file, reassessing her utility, calculating whether she is still an asset or whether she has become a liability. The rain intensifies. Thunder rolls across San Antonio like artillery. She sits in her truck in the parking lot for 12 minutes and 37 seconds, watching Pierce through the glass doors of the ER, watching him walk to his car with the same confident stride he always has, and she understands something with the clarity of a combat assessment: this is not over. This is only the beginning of the part where she has to choose between the mission and the person. And she has no idea which one she will choose. 3 in the morning at Martina's diner, and Danielle Ross stares at her reflection in the dark window like it belongs to someone else. The vinyl booth crackles beneath her weight. Coffee sits untouched on the laminate table, a cold ring forming around the base of the cup. Outside, San Antonio's rain hammers the parking lot in waves, and she doesn't look away from her own face, the one that was a nurse 8 hours ago, the one that won't be anything by dawn. Her phone buzzes. 17 times now. Each vibration lands like a trigger squeeze. The latest message glows on screen: mission parameters compromised. Extraction pending. Check encrypted channel. Do not acknowledge this number again. 8 months. She'd built the cover for 8 months, the careful anonymity, the invisible competence, the way she learned to fold herself smaller every single day. Danielle Ross, RN, Seattle General. No record of prior service. No classified markers. No connections. Just a nurse with steady hands and a tendency to bend protocol when patients were dying. The mission was simple: monitor Colonel Vance through his cardiac care, track the VA transfer pipeline for security leaks, note which pharmaceutical vendors had clearance issues. Infiltrate, observe, report. Extract when Phase 2 concluded. She couldn't have predicted Marcus Webb at 2 p.m. She couldn't have predicted that she'd walk toward a man with an AR-15 and an empty chest where his wife used to live. Couldn't have predicted that Dr. Pierce would interpret an act of tactical de-escalation as psychological instability. Couldn't have predicted that the moment she spoke her war voice, the one that talks combatants down in the Kandahar dust, the algorithm that tracks her movements would activate, flagging her cover as a medical professional operating in active threat scenarios. Protocol violation. Weapon situation. Unauthorized crisis intervention. All true. All catastrophic. The waitress, name tag says Brenda, late 60s, kind eyes that have seen their own share of damage, approaches with the coffee pot. Warm that up, hun? Danielle shakes her head once. Doesn't look away from the window. Her jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, the same way it did when Pierce stood outside room 347, his voice loud enough for the family inside to hear. The same way it did when her badge went dark. When HR called her into the office. When they handed her the suspension letter with 2 words that felt like a trapdoor opening beneath her feet, effective immediately, Brenda sets the pot down and walks away. She understands the language of women who don't want company. By afternoon, Seattle General's routine security clearance audit would flag her file. Classified markers triggering automatic Department of Defense inquiry, standard protocol when military personnel appear in incident reports. Dr. Pierce would intercept the notification in the administrative system, his smile widening as he read the header, as he understood that his suspicions about her being irregular had been validated by the most powerful institution on Earth. He would forward it to the board with annotations, building his case brick by brick with the precision of a man who has learned how to weaponize bureaucracy. The rain intensifies. Thunder rolls across the city like distant artillery, and her shoulders don't move. Hands that have held lives together stay folded on the table, steady as a surgical laser even though everything beneath the surface is collapsing. She reaches for her phone. The encrypted channel pulls up, sterile text on a black screen, the way all her communications with her handler have been for 237 days. The message is already typed, waiting only for transmission, Bravo Charlie standing by for extraction parameters. Mission status, compromised. Requesting immediate egress. Her thumb hovers over the send button. Through the diner window, she watches rain stream down the glass like tears the building refuses to cry. Her reflection wavers, distorts, becomes someone else entirely. Someone in uniform. Someone whose son served under Captain Ross in 2019, in the valley where the wind comes down like a weapon and the mountains hold memories that don't stop bleeding. The message doesn't send. She closes the phone instead and sets it face down on the table. The encrypted channel will interpret silence as deliberation. Her handler will interpret deliberation as instability. By dawn, extraction orders will escalate. By 0600, a recovery team will be en route with or without her compliance. But Colonel Vance is still in room 347. Still fragile, still cardiac compromised, still the only person inside Seattle General who needs her more than the mission does. And she's defied suspension before. She can defy it again. The diner's fluorescent lights buzz overhead, harsh and accusatory. She looks at her hands, scarred, capable, the kind of hands that have sutured wounds in field hospitals and performed needle decompression at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, without hesitation. The same hands that Dr. Pierce watched save a life and then documented as reckless. The same hands that he's now got 17 pages of staff testimonies working to discredit. By end of shift, Pierce would have weaponized everyone. The nurses he'd been grooming for weeks with carefully planted suggestions about Danielle's questionable judgment. The residents who'd overheard his whispered concerns about her concerning lack of formal protocol. The attending physicians who'd listened to his stories about her unpredictability. Each signature another nail, another lock, another sealed door between her and the patient who needed her. The letter sits in her jacket pocket, folded once. Hospital Regulation 7.3.2, unauthorized crisis intervention, including but not limited to tactical communication with armed subjects, represents grounds for immediate suspension pending psychiatric evaluation. Such actions indicate psychological instability and present ongoing risk to facility safety. He'd filed the paperwork within the hour of Marcus Webb being escorted from the building. Within the hour of Danielle successfully de-escalating a situation that could have killed 8 people. Within the hour of her proving that she understood human behavior at a level Pierce's medical degree would never touch. She picks up her phone again. Types a message to the encrypted line, Bravo Charlie status, continuing mission. 3-day timeline minimum. The response comes back before she can lower the phone, negative. Extraction is priority. Do not make contact with target again. That is an order. She types, with respect, sir, I'm not finished here. The next message takes longer. 10 seconds becomes 20. Becomes the kind of silence that fills the space between obedience and mutiny. You understand the implications of refusal? Yes, sir. I do. Another pause. Then, 72 hours. Then your evac whether or not phase 2 is complete. Protect yourself, Captain. She closes the phone. The coffee is cold now, the cup empty except for the ring it's left behind, evidence of something that was there and isn't anymore. Outside, the rain begins to ease. By the time dawn breaks over San Antonio, the clouds will be thinning, the humidity breaking, the world returning to normal. Everything except her. Everything except the fact that she walked toward a man with a loaded rifle instead of running. Everything except the fact that she'll spend tomorrow night in room 347 pretending her suspension is valid while her cover burns away like shed skin. She slides out of the booth. Leaves a 20 on the table. Walks past Brenda without looking back. The parking lot smells like wet asphalt and diesel exhaust from the trucks rolling past on I-35. Her car sits under a light that flickers like it's dying. She gets in, hands gripping the wheel, and sits in the darkness of the cab with the engine off. Her reflection stares back at her from the rearview mirror, the face of a nurse, the eyes of a soldier, the posture of someone who's already made a choice and now just has to live with the consequences. 72 hours until extraction. 72 hours to protect a mission that's already been compromised. 72 hours until someone in the Pentagon decides her utility is worth less than her security risk. 72 hours until Seattle General finishes destroying her, and the Army finishes erasing her. She starts the engine and drives back toward the hospital, back toward the suspension she won't accept, back toward room 347 where an old Marine lies in a hospital bed and probably doesn't even know his old captain is about to sacrifice everything just to make sure he stays breathing. 3 days. She can hold the line for 3 days. She's held worse. The rain picks up again as she exits the highway, and she doesn't turn on the wipers, just drives through the sheets of water like it doesn't dare touch her, like the storm itself knows what she's made of. By the time she reaches Seattle General, the sun is beginning to rise over the eastern edge of the city, and inside room 347, Colonel Vance lies awake, his heart monitor beeping its steady rhythm, completely unaware that the woman who saved him is about to sacrifice her entire future just by walking back through these doors. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later when the routine security clearance audit flagged her file, when classified markers triggered automatic inquiry, when Dr. Pierce intercepted the notification and began building the fortress that would finally, absolutely destroy her, until something arrived that he couldn't have predicted, that none of them could have predicted. Something that changed the meaning of every decision she'd made since the moment she chose to become a nurse instead of staying a soldier. The security audit came through on a Tuesday morning, encrypted email flagged at 6:02 a.m., the kind of routine clearance review that happened to everyone eventually. Classified markers triggered automatic inquiry. Standard protocol. Except nothing about Danielle Ross was standard, and when Dr. Pierce intercepted the notification in his hospital inbox, his face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He sat in his corner office with its mahogany desk and leather chairs, the trappings of a man who believed his position made him untouchable, and read the notification 3 times. Department of Defense. Joint Personnel Adjudication System. Active security clearance holder. His carefully constructed narrative suddenly looked fragile as glass. By noon, Pierce had moved from shock to action. He descended to the basement IT department with the confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted, found Jorge Martinez at his station, and requested the waiting room footage from the gunman incident. The footage from 6 days ago. The footage that showed Pierce locking himself in his office while Danielle walked toward a man with an AR-15 raised and trembling in his hands. Jorge's dark eyes registered nothing, but something in the set of his jaw made Pierce uncomfortable. Navy tattoo on the inside of his wrist. Probably ex-enlisted. Probably exactly the kind of guy who didn't forget things like cowardice. Pierce smiled anyway, the smile of someone accustomed to compliance. Routine review. Administrative purposes. Jorge nodded slowly and returned to his keyboard without responding. Pierce waited. Jorge didn't pull the footage. That evening, after the hospital fell quiet and visiting hours ended, Pierce sat at his desktop in the darkness of his office. The city lights of San Antonio sprawled 15 stories below him, and his fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of someone who'd spent years destroying evidence without leaving traces. He'd covered his tracks before. A diabetic patient whose misdiagnosis he'd blamed on noncompliance. A post-operative infection he'd documented as patient negligence. Each carefully worded note, each revised timestamp, each subtle reframing of facts. It was a language he spoke fluently. The deletion protocol initiated. Progress bar climbing. 15%. 32%. The original footage, his locked office, Danielle's approach, the gunman's trembling hands, all of it being erased, reduced to digital nothing. 47%. He breathed out slowly. By tomorrow morning, there would be no evidence. No video showing him hiding. No visual proof that she'd been the one with courage. The progress bar froze. Red text bloomed across the screen like blood in water, access denied, administrator override. In the IT department 2 floors below, Jorge Martinez watched the deletion attempt on his secondary monitor with the grim satisfaction of a man who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. He'd served 9 years with the Navy's Cyber Warfare Development Group before taking a hospital job. He understood systems. He understood people who underestimated the people maintaining those systems. He'd been keeping backup since the day Pierce misdiagnosed his own father-in-law's diabetic coma and blamed the patient for non-compliance. Every suspicious edit since then. Every altered timestamp. Every covered mistake preserved on external drives disconnected from the main network. The waiting room footage, all of it, complete, timestamped, sat on 3 separate servers before Pierce even knew to destroy it. He'd also captured the deletion attempt itself. The moment Pierce's panic became data. The moment his competence revealed its limits. Jorge compiled it all in the silence of the basement, Pierce attempting deletion at 8:31 p.m. on day 6. Original footage showing the doctor's office door locking at 1:58 p.m. on day 0. His incident report with 17 different revision timestamps, each edit growing more elaborate, more desperate. 3 previous cases where Pierce had altered records to shift blame. The progression was beautiful in its clarity, a monument to one man's systematic destruction of the truth. Jorge burned it to a disk, placed it in a manila envelope, and walked it personally to the hospital board's office on the 3rd floor. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to. Evidence spoke louder than words, and he'd just given them a symphony. Pierce's phone rang at 2:06 p.m. the following afternoon. Executive conference room. Immediately. He knew before he got there. The way the hospital administrator's face looked. The way the chief medical officer wouldn't meet his eyes. The way they had the disc playing on the monitor before he even sat down. The footage. His locked office door. The progress bar of his deletion attempt, frozen at 47% like a monument to his failure. When they played the audio from the incident report revisions, when they showed him the pattern of altered timestamps spanning 18 months, when they presented the families pursuing malpractice suits, 3 families, each one a stone around his neck, Pierce's voice became something thin and desperate. He tried explanations. Misunderstandings. Context they weren't considering. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. His words fell into the silence like stones down a well. Back in room 347, Danielle sat beside Colonel Vance's bed and held his hand while the afternoon light painted the room gold. The old man's grip was surprisingly strong for someone who'd been hospitalized for 6 weeks, his eyes the color of worn denim focusing on her with an intensity that made oxygen stats irrelevant. "Your son was the best soldier I ever served with, sir." Her voice stayed level, clinical, the way it always did. "Before Kandahar." The colonel's eyes glistened. "He said the same about you, Captain. Said you had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen under fire." Danielle didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't let the weight of that phrase bend her posture. The folded flag sat in her locker downstairs, fresh from the casualty assistant's office, displayed beside a photograph of a second lieutenant with her exact jawline and her exact composure. The unspoken truth between them hung like humidity in the room, her son didn't make it home. The flag belonged to him. The mission had cost her everything except the ability to keep working, to keep helping people like this old man who'd watched her son die under fire and had never once forgotten the name of the nurse who'd saved his life. 6 months later, morning sunlight streamed through the windows of room 347 with the kind of clarity that only comes in San Antonio's spring. Colonel Vance stood upright, physical therapy complete, discharge papers signed, his daughter waiting in the lobby with tears of relief and disbelief that he'd made it this far. Danielle adjusted his pillow one final time, back in her cartoon-printed scrubs now, her badge reading something different, RN Supervisor, Veteran Services. The administrative title was real. The authority was real. Her cover was blown to fragments, but her mission continued, monitoring vulnerable veterans in the VA transfer pipeline, now with full clearance, now with Pentagon oversight, now openly what she'd always secretly been. Through the window beside his bed, she watched the parking lot below where a medical supply van sat idle, tailgate open, cardboard boxes being loaded by a man whose shoulders had lost their confidence. Dr. Pierce. No hospital privileges. No medical license pending investigation. No power except the power to carry his own boxes and pay his own legal bills while 3 families pursued settlements for the patients he'd failed. The progress bar of his life had frozen at 47%, and he would spend the rest of his career watching it stay there. Jorge Martinez from IT appeared with coffee at 3:15 p.m., rendered a quiet nod to Danielle that said everything protocol prevented him from saying aloud. The Navy veteran who'd understood that evidence is truth made permanent. The young Marine Lance Corporal appeared with his grandfather, both men offering respectful acknowledgement to the woman in cartoon scrubs, their eyes carrying the weight of recognition. The general's formal commendation letter hung framed in the nurse's station, explaining to anyone who questioned her authority that Captain Danielle Ross, United States Army Special Forces, had served her country in ways that extended far beyond the uniform she'd set aside. Colonel Vance paused before the folded flag now displayed openly on Danielle's desk beside a photograph of a second lieutenant. He'd be proud, Captain. So would mine, sir. She walked him to the exit where his daughter waited with arms open, and Danielle watched the door close behind them, watched families fill the waiting room where danger once stood, watched people see something different now when they looked at her. Not just a nurse. A woman who'd walked toward threats while others ran. A woman who'd stayed steady while the powerful crumbled. A woman whose legend had been hidden beneath scrubs until the moment when it needed to shine. Danielle returned to her station, pulled the next chart from the holder, and continued her rounds. Room 348. Room 349. Room 350. The same careful hands that had held lives together in the Hindu Kush now held clipboards in fluorescent light. The same mind that had calculated fire trajectories now calculated medication intervals. The same courage that had defined soldiers now defined nurses. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. If this story of quiet strength resonating through chaos spoke to you, please subscribe for more tales of people defined by what they do when the world stops watching. Like this video, comment with your own story of being underestimated, and tell me, would you have walked toward the danger or away from it? We'll see you in the next one.